There's a mountain in central Iran, buried under 280 feet of solid granite, where one of the most dangerous stockpiles on Earth has been hidden from the world, 440 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity, enough raw material, if taken one step further, to build approximately 10 nuclear weapons. The IAEA cannot confirm its exact location. International inspectors have not had access to it since June 2025, and as of June 2nd, 2026, day 94 of the Iran and United States standoff, Iran's supreme leader has issued a direct internal directive that uranium does not leave Iranian territory under any circumstances. But what happened next changed everything. Because while Iran was locking down its most prized asset and issuing defiant statements from behind closed doors, the United States military was doing something very specific, something very calculated, and something that every analyst, every government, every military planner in the world is now processing with extreme urgency. The B-2 Spirit stealth bomber did not stand down. The targeting package did not go cold. And Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth flew to Singapore, walked into a room with 40 of the world's defense ministers, and delivered a message so precise and so unambiguous that there was no room left for interpretation. This is not a story about diplomacy failing. This is a story about what comes after diplomacy fails. And right now, on June 2nd, 2026, the world is watching the final moments before that question gets answered for real. To understand what is truly unfolding, you have to go back to May 26, 2026, because that is the day IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi did something that almost no senior international diplomat does in situations this delicate. He did not send a letter. He did not issue a statement through a spokesperson. He personally boarded a plane and flew to Astana, Kazakhstan, where he sat down face-to-face with Kazakhstani President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev. On the table was a formal, institutionally backed proposal that Kazakhstan would physically host Iran's entire enriched uranium stockpile. This was not a casual offer raised in a hallway conversation. This was the most serious, most credible, most logistically sound uranium transfer proposal ever put to Tehran. And the reason Kazakhstan is uniquely credible for this role is not accidental. Kazakhstan produces 6% of the entire world's uranium. That is not a rounding error. It is the dominant share of global production by a significant margin. The national economy, the industrial infrastructure, the technical workforce, the institutional knowledge, every aspect of Kazakhstan's economic identity is built around the uranium fuel cycle. Storing and safeguarding enriched material is not a challenge for Kazakhstan the way it would be for almost any other country on Earth. It is a core national competency. Beyond that, Kazakhstan hosted the P5+1 talks with Iran in 2013, which means it has a verified track record of serving as a neutral diplomatic venue in the specific Iran nuclear context. And critically, Kazakhstan operates the only IAEA low-enriched uranium fuel bank on the planet. This facility was specifically designed and built to hold uranium fuel under international supervision in a neutral country. If you sat down and designed from scratch the single most credible, most neutral, most institutionally appropriate custodian for Iran's enriched uranium, the result would look exactly like Kazakhstan's existing infrastructure. Director General Grossi's personal visit to Astana was the full weight of the international nuclear watchdog saying, "This offer is serious, this offer is real, and this offer solves the problem." Iran said no. Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei issued an internal directive stating that the enriched uranium stockpile should not leave Iranian territory under any circumstances. 2 senior Iranian sources confirmed the exact language. The stockpile stays in Iran. But what came next is where this story takes a turn that every analyst needs to sit with for a moment, because Iran did not just say no. Iran explained why. And that explanation is the most revealing thing the Iranian government has said publicly in the entire 94-day conflict. The reasoning Iran gave for refusing the Kazakhstan transfer was that surrendering the material would leave Iran more vulnerable. Read that sentence again, slowly. Surrendering the material would leave Iran more vulnerable. That is not the reasoning of a country running a civilian nuclear energy program. A civilian nuclear program does not make its country more vulnerable when enriched reactor fuel is transferred to international custody. It loses the fuel and gains compliance credit with international inspectors. Military deterrents make their holders more vulnerable when surrendered because the deterrent itself is gone. Iran is not saying it needs the uranium for reactors. Iran is saying it needs the uranium because the threat of building a bomb is the weapon itself. The 440 kilograms of 60% enriched material are not fuel rods waiting to power a city. They are a loaded gun pointed at every government in the world that Iran is refusing to put down. That admission is the moment the strategic picture becomes completely clear. Iran's last card is the uranium. Iran knows it. Washington knows it. Every government that was watching those Doha negotiations from a distance now knows it. The question that the world has been circling around for 94 days has finally been answered by Iran itself. And the answer was no. This is where things take a very serious turn. Because on the same day that Iran was doubling down internally on keeping its uranium, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth was standing at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, one of the world's most significant annual gatherings of defense ministers, with representatives from 40 nations in the room. And what he said was not a general reassurance about American military capabilities. It was a precisely worded statement with a very specific audience and a very specific message. Hegseth stated that the United States is more than capable of resuming strikes, that American stockpiles are more than suited for such operations, and that the blockade, which has been extracting $500 million per day from Iran's economy since April 13th, is very much still in place, more than capable, more than suited, very much still in place. Those are not the words of a country winding down a conflict. Those are the words of a country that has kept the engine running, that has kept the aircraft positioned, that has kept the targeting solutions current, and that is now telling every government in that room, and through them every government not in that room, that the diplomatic window is narrowing, and what sits on the other side of that window has a name, a flight plan, and a runway at Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. What most people do not realize is what the American military intelligence architecture has been doing every single day since the ceasefire began on April 8th, 2026. Because a ceasefire is not a stand-down. The RC-135 rivet joint signals intelligence aircraft, 22 of which the Air Force operates with at least 4 deployed to bases in the region, have been hovering over Iran's entire nuclear infrastructure continuously. Every communication signal between enrichment sites, every power grid signature consistent with centrifuge operations, every radar emission from any movement involving nuclear-related materials or personnel. Every single time anything moves anywhere near Iran's nuclear infrastructure, the RC-135 logs it, the targeting chain updates, and the picture of where every gram of enriched uranium is located gets more precise. The F-35A has been flying persistent missions over the Strait of Hormuz every day of the ceasefire, passing real-time targeting data across the joint force. During Operation Midnight Hammer in June 2025, F-35As were the first aircraft to penetrate Iranian airspace and the last to leave. The same jets that suppressed Iran's air defense architecture then are the same platforms feeding the current targeting picture now, and they are feeding it to a targeting package that has been building, updating, and refining for 94 consecutive days. Then there is Pickaxe Mountain, because this is the specific problem that changes the military calculus in ways that demand complete analytical clarity. Pickaxe Mountain, officially known as Ku-a-Kolangazla, sits 1 mile south of the Natanz nuclear facility in central Iran. It was not targeted during Operation Midnight Hammer in June 2025, when B-2 Spirit bombers from Whiteman Air Force Base flew 37 hours nonstop to drop 14 massive ordnance penetrator GBU-57 bombs onto the vent shafts and tunnel entrances of the Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan nuclear facilities. Pickaxe Mountain was left untouched, and Iran has been using every day since then to make it harder. High-resolution satellite imagery from early 2026 confirmed what analysts had suspected. Iran accelerated reinforcement efforts at Pickaxe Mountain after the June 2025 strikes. At one of the eastern tunnel entrances, rock and soil were pushed back and leveled over the tunnel portal. A concrete reinforced headworks for the tunnel entrance extension was added, allowing for additional overburden of rock, soil, and concrete. These efforts were specifically designed to strengthen the tunnel portals and provide additional protection against exactly the kind of airstrike that destroyed the vent shafts at Fordo. Iran watched what happened to those 3 facilities in June 2025 and spent the next several months engineering a harder target in response. The facility is reported to be buried under approximately 280 feet of solid granite. That is a serious engineering challenge. The GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator is designed to penetrate approximately 200 feet of reinforced concrete before detonating. Granite is denser than reinforced concrete and presents a harder penetration problem at the same impact conditions. A single strike may not reach the storage chamber, but the technique of sequential restrike penetration, striking the same precise point with multiple weapons in sequence, creates a progressively deepening channel that cumulative strikes can exploit beyond what any single weapon achieves alone. This is not an impenetrable mountain. It is a harder target that requires more weapons, more precise delivery, and more sequential coordination than the 3 sites struck in June 2025. And here is what the American positioning tells you about where this stands right now. The WC-135R, Constant Phoenix Atmospheric Collection Aircraft, the platform specifically designed to detect nuclear material signatures in the atmosphere, has been stationed at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar throughout the entire conflict. Its presence is not accidental. It is the confirmation that the United States is actively monitoring every atmospheric signature over and around Iran's nuclear storage locations for any indication of where the material is or whether any processing activity is occurring. The IAEA Director General himself stated in March 2026 that approximately 200 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium is most likely still at Isfahan, with some material also believed to be at Natanz. The targeting package knows roughly where the uranium is. Every day of the 94-day standoff, that picture gets more precise. But here's what most people are missing about what is happening right now on June 2nd, 2026. Because there's a tentative ceasefire extension framework that American and Iranian negotiators were reportedly close to finalizing as of May 29th. And the specific crack running through the center of that framework is exactly the uranium sequencing question that no diplomatic language has been able to bridge. The American position, articulated publicly and precisely by Treasury Secretary Bessent at the White House podium, is no dust, no dollars. Iran's 440 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium must be disposed of before any economic benefit flows. That is not a negotiating position with flexibility around its edges. It is a structural precondition. The uranium leaves before the money arrives. On that sequencing, the American position has not moved. Iran's position, stated repeatedly through its foreign ministry and senior advisors, is that the nuclear issue comes later. The blockade lifts first. Sanctions relief flows first. The strait reopens first. And then, during some future 60-day negotiating window, the uranium question gets discussed. Iran wants the leverage removed before it gives up anything. These two positions are not a gap that clever language can bridge. They are a fundamental structural incompatibility about which action is the precondition for the other. The mostly agreed framework that was being discussed in Doha contains every other element of a deal. But the uranium sequencing question is the one element that remains unresolved. And it is the only element that actually matters. Senior Iranian source told Reuters on June 1st, 2026, that Tehran has not agreed to hand over its highly enriched uranium, and that the nuclear issue was not part of the preliminary agreement. Iran's foreign ministry stated there has been no final understanding with the United States, and there will not be one until the naval blockade is lifted first. What most people do not realize is that Iran's public rhetoric on this issue is not just negotiating posture. It is a window into exactly how the Iranian leadership is calculating its own survival. Mohsen Rezai, senior advisor to the supreme leader and the man currently leading Iran's public communication strategy, posted on the same day that Trump is not inclined toward negotiations and is pursuing other objectives. This is a man watching his country get drained of $500 million per day, watching the IRGC's payroll fail, watching police officers stop reporting for work because the salary payments have stopped, watching the currency collapse in real time, watching anonymous Iranian soldiers film themselves saying they are ashamed to wear the uniform. And his public response is to accuse Washington of betraying diplomacy. That is not the language of a negotiating partner. That is the language of an institution trying to preserve its own legitimacy while its financial foundation collapses underneath it. The cumulative economic damage of the blockade has now reached approximately $47 billion. Every day that the blockade runs, $500 million more is extracted from an Iranian economy that was already under severe stress before February 28th. The oil export revenues that fund the IRGC's parallel institutional structure, its commercial enterprises, its international proxy operations, its domestic security apparatus, are not flowing. Karg Island, which handles 90% of Iran's oil export capacity, cannot load tankers, because those tankers cannot leave through the blockade. Satellite imagery showed a 71-kilometer oil slick from overflow storage that cannot be offloaded. The storage capacity filled to its operational limit with oil that has nowhere to go. And yet Iran is holding the uranium, because Iran has calculated that the uranium is the only card left. The air defense architecture was degraded in Operation Epic Fury beginning February 28th. The missile production leadership was decapitated. The nuclear enrichment infrastructure at Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan took 14 massive ordnance penetrators in June 2025. The Iraqi proxy forces that Iran brought into Tehran's streets to supplement its internal security apparatus are now fighting the IRGC itself, with 5 PMU fighters killed in Revolution Square. The internet was turned back on after 87 days of blackout specifically because the information blackout was producing more dangerous domestic instability than information access. Every tool Iran has for maintaining control over its own population is degrading simultaneously. The uranium is the last card. And Iran knows that the moment the uranium leaves Iranian territory, the regime loses the one thing that forces Washington to keep talking. But here's the problem with that calculation. And this is the part that the Iranian leadership may have miscalculated from the beginning. The American response to Iran holding the uranium is not to keep talking indefinitely. It is to keep the targeting package current, keep the B-2 on the runway, keep the blockade running at $500 million per day, and wait for the internal collapse math to produce a different Iranian decision. The United States is not folding to a deterrent threat from a country whose currency is in freefall, whose police are not showing up for work, whose military payroll is failing, and whose internal security forces are fighting each other in the streets of the capital. On June 2nd, 2026, the situation stands precisely here. The tentative ceasefire extension framework exists on paper. Trump described the deal as largely negotiated, but the uranium sequencing gap remains open. Iran denied agreeing to surrender the uranium. The blockade is fully in place. The strike package remains postured. Hegseth confirmed in Singapore that America is more than capable of resuming operations. And Pickaxe Mountain, which Iran has been reinforcing since June 2025, sits 1 mile south of Natanz, waiting to find out whether the restrike penetration mathematics get tested against its 280 feet of granite. What most people do not realize is that the Kazakhstan offer was not just a diplomatic gesture. It was the last best off-ramp, the single most credible, most neutral, most institutionally sound solution to the uranium problem that the international community could construct. IAEA Director General Grossi flew personally to Astana to make it real. Kazakhstan offered its own national infrastructure, its proven track record as a neutral venue in the Iran nuclear context, and its unique institutional role as the world's only IAEA fuel bank operator, all in service of a solution that would have removed the uranium, verified the disposition, and given Iran a path toward economic relief, without the B-2 needing to make the calculation for everyone. Iran's supreme leader said no, and that no is the answer that has now set every other calculation in motion. The B-2 spirit does not fold when the stakes get high. The targeting package has been running for 94 days. The atmospheric monitoring aircraft is in Qatar. The F-35 is watching everything. The RC-135 is logging every movement. And the GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator was specifically designed for exactly this kind of problem, the deeply buried hardened facility that conventional weapons cannot reach in a single pass, but that sequential precision delivery can ultimately breach. Day 94. The uranium is still in Iran. The offer that would have solved this diplomatically has been refused. The blockade is running. The targeting package is current. And every decision being made right now in every negotiating room, every military command post, every presidential residence connected to this conflict is being made with the complete awareness that the next move determines whether this ends on paper or whether it ends the way Operation Midnight Hammer ended, except this time the target is deeper. The stakes are higher, and the mountain has been reinforced. The uranium leaves on American terms, or the mountain finds out what comes after diplomacy. Because here is the final calculation that every government watching the situation must now process simultaneously. Iran is not a country that can sustain the current pressure indefinitely. The blockade physics are relentless. $500 million per day multiplied by every additional day the uranium stays in Iranian territory is a number that does not stop growing until something breaks. And the thing that breaks first is not usually the will of the side that controls the blockade. It is the will of the side that cannot pay its soldiers, cannot suppress its own population, cannot load its oil onto tankers, and cannot reverse the currency collapse that is eroding the purchasing power of 90 million people every single morning they wake up. Iran bet that America would blink first. America bet that Iran would run out of runway. The runway is getting shorter with every day that passes. And the B-2 has more than enough fuel for the distance between Missouri and the Zagros Mountains. What happens in the next 72 hours will answer the question that 94 days of standoff, bombing, ceasefire, blockade, negotiation, violation, and escalation have been building toward. Either the uranium moves on terms that Washington can verify and Iran can survive, or the next chapter of this conflict begins with a different kind of answer, one that 280 feet of granite may not be deep enough to stop. The world is watching. The clock is running. And the mountain does not know yet what it is about to find out. Iran has now spent 94 days calculating that Washington needs a deal more than Tehran does. That calculation was built on a specific theory, that the economic disruption to global energy markets caused by the Strait of Hormuz closure, the pressure from Gulf partners, the inflation impact on American consumers, the urgency of the midterm political calendar, all of these would combine to push the United States toward accepting terms that left the uranium question for later. That theory has not produced the result Iran expected, and the gap between what Iran expected and what has actually happened is now being measured in the distance between a B-2 runway in Missouri and a mountain in central Iran. The deal is either coming today or the answer to day 94 is already in the air.